talk first of all about what unforgiveness is. Unforgiveness is when you react to a transgression or an injustice by delayed thoughts. That's a key point there, delayed thoughts, such as resentment, bitterness, residual anger, residual fear, hatred, hostility, stress. Those things motivate people to formulate recursive and iterative narratives and ruminate on thoughts of negative intentions. So what that last part means is that when you're transgressed, you have a narrative, you have a story about what happened. And that story will either lead you to what I call negative intentions. In other words, if I could act on this person, here are the ways I would act, and those ways are all negative. And when you begin to think about negative intentions towards the person, the narrative grows. The story is like a snowball. It takes on new meaning. It might not even be the same story after you've thought about it enough. And as that narrative grows, you continue to ruminate on whatever the transgression was. There are ways that we can reduce our unforgiveness, but those ways don't bring permanent emotional peace. So you can say, for example, well, if that person comes and asks me for forgiveness, if they say they're sorry, then I'll let them go. And they may come and say they're sorry, but you won't have full emotional peace just because they've done that. It's not the responsibility of the transgressor to gain forgiveness. That's how it was in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the transgressor had to come and face up to what they had done. But that's not what we're taught in the New Testament. We're taught that it's the responsibility of the person that's been transgressed to generate forgiveness. And what that means is that it requires nothing of the person that transgressed you. That's an important point, because we tend to think that forgiveness means the other person and I have to somehow rectify what happened. That's not forgiveness. That's restitution. That's rebuilding a relationship. And that's important, and we have examples of that in the Bible, but guess what? There are no examples in the Bible of relational forgiveness. I believe the reason for that is because Christ wanted us to follow his example of forgiveness for us. And there's no perfect example of relational forgiveness that you can come up with that would demonstrate for you how to go and forgive. We're given some instructions, but those aren't examples of an actual occurrence. In fact, fasten your seatbelts on this one. Jesus never forgave anybody for an interpersonal infraction towards him. He never did. Even on the cross, he didn't forgive the people that put him there. He asked the Father to. And that's an important point, because sometimes a person simply can't forgive. So if you go to the next page, what I've done here is I've created a picture of what I call the life cycle of unforgiveness. Unforgiveness starts with a transgression. That's where somebody violates some rule you have about how you think you should be treated in the world. I call them unenforceable rules, because your rules about how you think you should be treated really aren't enforceable. You can share those rules with other people, and they may choose to treat you differently, but you yourself can't enforce those rules. And when those rules are violated, it triggers emotions and feelings. Emotions and feelings are different. Emotions are what you're born with. Nobody teaches a baby to laugh or cry or to show disgust if you put something ugly in their mouth. A baby is born with certain emotional features. And those emotional features are not right or wrong. They're just the body's reaction to some threat that would prevent us from achieving well-being. achieving a state of peace and calm. So when we interpret those emotions, we interpret them with feelings. Feelings are the value that we give to emotions. They're the narratives that we create in our mind about the emotion we're experiencing. And feelings are a choice. So when we begin to feel that we've been violated, we're angry, we're disgusted, we're resentful, those rules are unenforceable, and so we try to cope with them. And when we try to cope with them, there are actually two ways that we can cope. We're going to visit this in just a minute in more detail. But one way to cope is positive and one is negative. And of the ways to cope, in a few minutes I'll go over this in more detail. But there's problem solving, there's emotional regulation, and there's reframing the situation. So if you're not able to do one of those three things in a positive way, then you cope in a negative way. And it's the negative coping that gets us into the vicious cycle of rumination that's over on the right side of the chart. Okay, so some symptoms of unforgiveness. When a person experiences what they believe is a transgression, then there's a strong possibility that they're experiencing unforgiveness. And the key word there is believe. They believe, and that's what matters. You may not agree. How on earth could that be something that's bothering you? But that doesn't matter. What matters is what they believe was a hurt to them. They're able to express how they feel about the hurt. They're able to tell you the story. They have strong feelings about how the effect of how the transgression has affected them. They have a story that describes it. They seem preoccupied with their story. They describe negative thoughts about how they want to respond to the person that transgressed them. They're not able to cope effectively with the transgression, which we'll go over in a few minutes. And they describe strategies to reduce their unforgiveness. And there's a lot of strategies that can reduce unforgiveness. But none of them, like we said, will fully bring emotional peace. It might make us feel better for a short time. But when we are unforgiving and we say that we've forgiven someone, we don't forget. That's a myth. You don't forget when you forgive. You may repress it. It may not be in the front of your mind, but it's still there. Once you've experienced a transgression, you can't unexperience it. So while you may forgive someone now, 2 years from now, something may happen to you that triggers a memory of that, and that memory brings back the rumination, brings back the stories, and so forth. So reducing unforgiveness on the next page describes desire to condone the transgressor's actions. The actions they desire to take against the transgressor are developed in their mind. They develop a willingness to let bygones be bygones and move on. They believe that time and inaction will soothe the hurt. They demonstrate cold, bitter, rejecting behaviors. Reducing unforgiveness happens when we believe that we're incapable of forgiving the transgressor, so we acquiesce. When we want to forgive, to forget the transgression as if it never happened, as if they didn't mean it, as if it was a mistake. When we do that, that may reduce our unforgiveness, and that might create some acceptance of what the person has done, or the person takes accountability for what's done. By the way, forgiveness doesn't mean a person isn't accountable for their behavior. Forgiveness is about your relationship to that person in your mind and what kind of thoughts you have towards them. But it doesn't condone a lack of accountability. A person is still accountable for their behavior, even if they've been forgiven.